that he has deferred. Our acting ranking member has deferred to the ranking member, so because we understand you're on a tight schedule. So Senator Langford is being very gracious.
Well, first I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Langford, for agreeing to be ranking today. It's been my practice, because Senator Langford is the chair of the subcommittee on D.C., that I defer to him with regard to these D.C. judge confirmation hearings. I do think these roles need to be filled, and I thank the 4 distinguished lawyers who are before us this morning who have stepped forward to fill those roles. I normally ask questions about the criminal justice system in D.C. because the crime wave is a huge concern of all of ours. And I will not have time to get into that today, but just assume that all 4 of you agree that part of your role is to assure that cases are brought and handled and backlogs are dealt with so that we can have a safer D.C. community. Dr. Shogan, I want to give you a chance to explain some of your previous statements and some of your record. The law, as you know, requires the archivist to be appointed without regard to political affiliation. In 2007, you wrote an article entitled "Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, a Republican Populism," which focuses on Presidents Eisenhower, Reagan, and George W. Bush. In it, you state that, quote, "Republicans tend to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities, and Democrats coalesce on the intellectual tail of the continuum." Would you please explain your views on this and what you meant by that?
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for that question. As you stated, that article was written 16, 17 years ago. It was an academic article. And in that article, I was trying to explain how certain presidents very effectively, through their rhetoric, were able to communicate with everyday Americans.
Again, you're being nominated as the nonpartisan National Archivist. Among other roles, the National Archives and Records Administration administers the presidential library system for Republicans and Democrats alike. Given that you have written about some of these Republican presidents in a negative way, for example, saying that Ronald Reagan had, quote, "less than impressive intellectual capabilities," end quote, and that, quote, "it was widely accepted that George W. Bush was less intelligent than his challenger, Al Gore," end quote. How can we be assured that you will serve effectively in this nonpartisan role?
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for that question. I stand strongly on my 15 years of nonpartisan government service at the Congressional Research Service, at the Library of Congress, and at the White House Historical Association, which I joined in 2019 when President Trump was President of the United States, worked very effectively with President Trump's White House as he served as President of the United States and continued to do so under President Biden's administration. Also at the White House Historical Association, we have members of the board who are representatives from both Republican and Democratic administrations, and I work very effectively with that board of directors.
With regard to January 6th, in response to a tweet from a political science professor which stated political science said this would happen, we are not smug about it. Either you tweeted back, and I quote, "I wrote about it in 2007. I do believe what I observed was the precursor." And you included a link to the Republican anti-intellectualism article that we talked about a moment ago. I just want to give you a chance to explain this. It would appear to me that you're saying that because you believe Republican presidents like George W. Bush, for whom I worked, as you know, tended to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities, and or because you believe he was less intelligent than his opponent, Al Gore, that these are the precursor somehow to the events of January 6th, which, of course, George W. Bush condemned in the strongest terms possible.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for that question. In no way, shape, or possible do I think that President Bush is inferior intellectually or less intelligent. That was not the purpose of the article. It's not stated in the article. And I was very clear that he was well-suited for the presidency, and that is stated in the article.
Okay. So the quote that I have, that it says it was widely accepted that Bush was less intelligent than his challenger, Al Gore, was not was not your quote.
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Portman. That was a characterization, but once again, I want to say that I stand by my statement that this was an article about President Bush and his rhetorical abilities to be able to communicate common sense principles to everyday Americans.
You do a lot of tweets about President Trump. You mentioned that you served under him essentially when you were at the Historical Society. Here's one on January 5th, 2020, which says, "Isn't the next move a self-pardon?" Self-pardon would imply criminality. If confirmed, you would have to work with the former president's staff. How can you be confident that you'd be able to work effectively with former President Trump's staff?
Yes. Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Portman. I am confident that I would be able to work with President Trump and his staff. I have worked with him in the past, as you noted, at the White House Historical Association, also in my capacity as the Vice Chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, which was entirely conducted during the Trump presidency. And we worked very effectively with President Trump, Mrs. Trump, and the White House during that celebration to, I think, really benefit the American people.
Dr. Shogan, there was a January 2020 memo from the Trump Justice Department, OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, which concluded that the Equal Rights Amendment's adoption could not be certified because not enough states had ratified the amendment prior to the relevant deadline set by Congress. Shortly thereafter, the National Archives press release stated that the archivist defers to the OLC on this issue and would abide by the opinion unless otherwise directed by a final court order. A January 2022 OLC memo by the Biden Justice Department stated that Congress was entitled to take a different view on that, but did not modify the conclusion of the January 2020 memo. If confirmed, would you continue to abide by the January 2020 OLC opinion as your predecessor did?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, I would.
And as the National Archives press release stated, would a court ordering you to certify the amendment be the only circumstances under which you would certify the amendment?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think the only who will decide the fate of the ERA is the federal judiciary and/or Congress.
There are members of Congress and interest groups who believe the archivist has the authority to certify the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm sure you're well aware of that. How would you respond to their calls to certify the amendment?
Yes, thank you for that question. The archivist serves in the capacity, in a nonpartisan, apolitical capacity, and I vowed, if I am confirmed as archivist, to serve in that fashion.
Thank you, Dr. Shogan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Acting Ranking Member Senator